Hey guys, welcome to Crypto News, your daily source of info. Before we start this video, let me remind you that I am not a financial advisor. Remember to always do your own research before investing in an asset. Now let's begin. UNISWAP v. Core. March 2021. Hayden Adams, HaydenUniswap.org.Noah. Zinsmeister, Noah Uniswap.org. Moody Salem, MoodyUniswap.org. River Kiefer, RiverUniswap.org. Dan Robinson, DanParadigm.xyz. Abstract Uniswap fee is a non-custodial automated market maker implemented for the Ethereum virtual machine. In comparison to earlier versions of the protocol, Uniswap fee provides increased capital efficiency and fine-tuned control to liquidity providers, improves the accuracy and convenience of the price oracle, and has a more flexible fee structure. 1. Introduction. Automated market makers are agents that pool liquidity and make it available to traders according to an algorithm. Constant function market makers, a broad class of AMs of which Uniswap is a member, have seen widespread use in the context of decentralized finance, where they are typically implemented as smart contracts that trade tokens on a permissionless blockchain. CFMMs as they are implemented today are often capital inefficient. In the constant product market maker formula used by Uniswap V&V, only a fraction of the assets in the pool are available at a given price. This is inefficient, particularly when assets are expected to trade close to a particular price at all times. Prior attempts to address this capital efficiency issue, such as curve and yield space, have involved building pools that use different functions to describe the relation between reserves. This requires all liquidity providers in a given pool to adhere to a single formula, and could result in liquidity fragmentation if liquidity providers want to provide liquidity within different price ranges. In this paper, we present Uniswap v. a novel AM that gives liquidity providers more control over the price ranges in which their capital is used, with limited effect on liquidity fragmentation and gas inefficiency. This design does not depend on any shared assumption about the price behavior of the tokens. Uniswap fee is based on the same constant product reserves curve as earlier versions, but offers several significant new features. Concentrated liquidity. Liquidity providers are given the ability to concentrate their liquidity by bounding it within an arbitrary price range. This improves the pool's capital efficiency and allows LPs to approximate their preferred reserves curve, while still being efficiently aggregated with the rest of the pool. We described this feature in Section 2 and its implementation in Section 6. Flexible fees. The swap fee is no longer locked at 0.30%. Rather, the fee tier for each pool is set on initialization. The initially supported fee tiers are 0.05%, 0.30%, and 1%. Uni-governance is able to add additional values to this set. Protocol fee governance. Uni-governance has more flexibility in setting the fraction of swap fees collected by the protocol. Improved price oracle. Uniswap fee provides a way for users to query recent price accumulator values, thus avoiding the need to checkpoint the accumulator value at the exact beginning and end of the period for which a TWAP is being measured. 1. Liquidity oracle. The contracts expose a time-weighted arbitrage liquidity oracle. The Uniswap v Core contracts are non-upgradable by design, so Uniswap v is implemented as an entirely new set of contracts. Available here? The Uniswap v Core contracts are also non-upgradable, with some parameters controlled by governance as described in Section 4. 2. Concentrated liquidity. The defining idea of Uniswap fee is that of concentrated liquidity bounded within some price range. In earlier versions, liquidity was distributed uniformly along the liquidity is composed entirely of a single asset because the reserves of the other asset must have been entirely depleted. If the price ever re-enters the range, the liquidity becomes active again. L, which is equal to K. The real reserves of a position are described. The amount of liquidity provided can be measured by the value by the curve, equal to L2. This curve is a translation of Formula 2.1, such that the position is solvent exactly within its range. Reserves curve, where X and Y are the respective reserves of two assets X and Y, and K is a constant. In other words, earlier versions were designed to provide liquidity across the entire price range. This is simple to implement and allows liquidity to be efficiently aggregated, but means that much of the assets held in a pool are never touched. Having considered this, it seems reasonable to allow LPs to concentrate their liquidity to smaller price ranges than we call liquidity concentrated to a finite range of position. A position only needs to maintain enough reserves to support trading within its range, and therefore can act like a constant product pool with larger reserves within that range. Y reserves. Virtual reserves, real reserves, virtual reserves, X reserves, Y reserves, X real. Figure simulation of virtual liquidity. Specifically, a position only needs to hold enough of asset X to cover price movement to its upper bound, because upwards price movement corresponds to depletion of the X reserves. Similarly, it only needs to hold enough of asset Y to cover price movement to its lower bound. Figure 1 depicts this relationship for a position on a range and a current price PC. X real and Y real denote the position's real reserves. When the price exits a position's range, the position's liquidity is no longer active and no longer earns fees. At that point, we take asset Y to be the unit of account, which corresponds to token in our implementation. X reserves, Y real, figure, real reserves. Liquidity providers are free to create as many positions as they see fit, each on its own price range. In this way, LPs can approximate any desired distribution of liquidity on the price space. Moreover, this serves as a mechanism to let the market decide where liquidity should be allocated. Rational LPs can reduce their capital cost by concentrating their liquidity in a narrow band around the current price, and adding or removing tokens as the price moves to keep their liquidity active. 2.1 Range orders. Positions on very small ranges act similarly to limit orders. If the range is crossed, the position flips from being composed entirely of one asset to being composed entirely of the other asset. There are two differences between this range order and a traditional limit order. There is a limit to how narrow a position's range can be. While the price is within that range, the limit order might be partially executed. When the position has been crossed, it needs to be withdrawn. If it is not, and the price crosses back across that range, the position will be traded back, effectively reversing the trade. 2. Liquidity. 0. Price. UNISWAP via single position on a collection of custom positions. Figure. Example liquidity distributions. 3. Architectural changes. UNISWAP V makes a number of architectural changes, some of which are necessitated by the inclusion of concentrated liquidity, and some of which are independent improvements. 3.1 Multiple pools per pair. In UNISWAP V and V, every pair of tokens corresponds to a single liquidity pool, which applies a uniform fee of 0.30% to all swaps. While this default fee tier historically worked well enough for many tokens, it is likely too high for some pools, and too low for others. UNISWAP V introduces multiple pools for each pair of tokens, each with a different swap fee. All pools are created by the same factory contract. The factory contract initially allows pools to be created at 3 fee tiers: 0.05%, 0.30%, and 1%. Additional fee tiers can be enabled by uni-governance: 3.2% non-fungible liquidity, 3.2.1% non-compounding fees. Fees earned in earlier versions were continuously deposited in the pool as liquidity. This meant that liquidity in the pool would grow over time, even without explicit deposits, and that fee earnings compounded. In UNISWAP V, due to the non-fungible nature of positions, this is no longer possible. Instead, fee earnings are stored separately and held as the tokens in which the fees are paid. 3.2% removal of native liquidity tokens. In UNISWAP V and V, the pool contract is also an ERC20 token contract, whose tokens represent liquidity held in the pool. While this is convenient, it actually sits uneasily with the UNISWAP V philosophy that anything that does not need to be in the core contract should be in the periphery. And blessing one canonical ERC20 implementation discourages the creation of improved ERC20 token wrappers. Arguably, the ERC20 token implementation should have been in the periphery, as a wrapper on a single liquidity position in the core contract. The changes made in UNISWAP V force this issue by making completely fungible liquidity tokens impossible. Due to the custom liquidity provision feature, fees are now collected and held by the pool as individual tokens, rather than automatically reinvested as liquidity in the pool. As a result, in V, the pool contract does not implement the ERC20 standard. Anyone can create an ERC20 token contract in the periphery that makes a liquidity position more fungible. But it will have to have additional logic to handle distribution of or reinvestment of collected fees. Alternatively, anyone could create a periphery contract that wraps an individual liquidity position in an ERC721 non-fungible token. 4. Governance. The factory has an owner, which is initially controlled by uni token holders. The owner does not have the ability to halt the operation of any of the core contracts. As in UNISWAP v. UNISWAP v has a protocol fee that can be turned on by UniGovernance. In UNISWAP v. UniGovernance has more flexibility in choosing the fraction of swap fees that go to the protocol, and is able to choose any fraction 1 and where 4 less than or equal to n less than or equal to 10 or 0. This parameter can be set on a per pool basis. UniGovernance also has the ability to add additional fee tiers. When it adds a new fee tier, it can also define the tick spacing corresponding to that fee tier. Once a fee tier is added to the factory, it cannot be removed. The initial fee tiers and tick spacing supported are 0.05%, 0.30%, and 1%, with a tick spacing of 200, approximately 2.02% between ticks. Finally, UniGovernance has the power to transfer ownership to another address. 5 Oracle upgrades. UNISWAP v includes 3 significant changes to the time-weighted average price Oracle that was introduced by UNISWAP v. Most significantly, UNISWAP v removes the need for users of the Oracle to track previous values of the accumulator externally. UNISWAP v requires users to checkpoint the accumulator value at both the beginning and end of the time period for which they. 2. Specifically, the owner will be initialized to the time lock contract from UniGovernance, 0 times. 3. Wanted to compute a TWAP. UNISWAP v brings the accumulator checkpoints into core, allowing external contracts to compute on-chain TWAPs over recent periods without storing checkpoints of the accumulator value. Another change is that instead of accumulating the sum of prices, allowing users to compute the arithmetic mean TWAP, UNISWAP v tracks the sum of log prices, allowing users to compute the geometric mean TWAP. Finally, UNISWAP v adds a liquidity accumulator that is tracked alongside the price accumulator. This liquidity accumulator can be used by other contracts to inform a decision on which of the pools corresponding to a pair will have the most reliable TWAP. 5.1 Oracle observations. As in UNISWAP v tracks a running accumulator of the price at the beginning of each block, multiplied by the number of seconds since the last block. A pool in UNISWAP v stores only the most recent value of this price accumulator, that is, the value as of the last block in which a swap occurred. When computing average prices in UNISWAP v, it is the responsibility of the external caller to provide the previous value of the price accumulator. With many users, each will have to provide their own methodology for checkpointing previous values of the accumulator, or coordinate on a shared method to reduce costs. And there is no way to guarantee that every block in which the pool is touched will be reflected in the accumulator. In UNISWAP v, the pool stores a list of previous values for the accumulator. It does this by automatically checkpointing the accumulator value every time the pool is touched for the first time in a block, cycling through an array where the oldest checkpoint is eventually overwritten by a new one, similar to a circular buffer. While this array initially only has room for a single checkpoint, anyone can initialize additional storage slots to lengthen the array, extending to as many as 65,536 checkpoints. This imposes the one-time gas cost of initializing additional storage slots for this array on whoever wants this pair to checkpoint more slots. The pool exposes the array of past observations to users, as well as a convenience function for finding the accumulator value at any historical timestamp within the checkpointed period. 5.2 Geometric Mean Price Oracle. UNISWAP v maintains 2 price accumulators, one for the price of token in terms of token, and one for the price of token in terms of token. Users can compute the time-weighted arithmetic mean of the prices over any period by subtracting the accumulator value at the beginning of the period from the accumulator at the end of the period, then dividing the difference by the number of seconds in the period. Note that accumulators for token and token are tracked separately, since the time-weighted arithmetic mean price of token is not equivalent to the reciprocal of the time-weighted arithmetic mean price of token. 3. The maximum of 65,536 checkpoints allows fetching checkpoints for at least 9 days after they are written, assuming 13 seconds pass between each block and a checkpoint is written every block. Using the time-weighted geometric mean price as UNISWAP v does, avoids the need to track separate accumulators for these ratios. The geometric mean of a set of ratios is the reciprocal of the geometric mean of their reciprocals. It is also easy to implement in UNISWAP v because of its implementation of custom liquidity provision, as described in Section 6. In addition, the accumulator can be stored in a smaller number of bits, since it tracks log p rather than p, and log p can represent a wide range of prices with consistent precision. Finally, there is a theoretical argument that the time-weighted geometric mean price should be a truer representation of the average price. Instead of tracking the cumulative sum of the price P, UNISWAP V accumulates the cumulative sum of the current tick index. The accumulator at any given time is equal to the sum of log on 0.0001 for every second in the history of the contract. At equal to OT log I equal to 1. We want to estimate the geometric mean time-weighted average price over any period T1 to T2. 1 T2 T1, PT1 T2 equal to OT2, I equal totone. To compute this, you can look at the accumulator's value at T1 and at T2, subtract the first value from the second, divide by the number of seconds elapsed, and compute 1.0001 times to compute the time-weighted geometric mean price. IT2 equal totone log T2 tone, A2 tone, log, T2 tone, A2 AT1, PTT2, 5.3 liquidity oracle. In addition to the time-weighted average price, UNISWAP V also tracks an accumulator of the current value of L at the beginning of each block. This can be used by on-chain contracts to make their oracles stronger. This liquidity accumulator's values are checkpointed along with the price accumulator. In order to support tolerable precision across all possible prices, UNISWAP V represents each price as a 224-bit fixed point number. UNISWAP V only needs to represent log on 0.0001p as a signed 24-bit number and still can detect price movements of 1 tick, or 1 basis point, 5 while arithmetic mean TWAPs are much more widely used. They should theoretically be less accurate in measuring a geometric Brownian motion process. The arithmetic mean of a geometric Brownian motion process will tend to overweight higher prices relative to lower ones. 6. Implementing concentrated liquidity. The rest of this paper describes how concentrated liquidity provision works and gives a high-level description of how it is implemented in the contracts. 6.1 Ticks and ranges. To implement custom liquidity provision, the space of possible prices is demarcated by discrete ticks. Liquidity providers can provide liquidity in a range between any 2 ticks. Each range can be specified as a pair of signed integer tick indices, a lower tick and an upper tick. Ticks represent prices at which the virtual liquidity of the contract can change. We will assume that prices are always expressed as the price of one of the tokens, called token, in terms of the other token, token. The assignment of the 2 tokens to token and token is arbitrary and does not affect the logic of the contract. Conceptually, there is a tick at every price P, that is an integer power of 1.0001, identifying ticks by an integer index 1, the price at each is given by P equal to 1.0001i. This has the desirable property of each tick being a price movement away from each of its neighboring ticks. For technical reasons explained in 6.2.1, however, pools actually 1.0001. Consider the above equation, transformed into square root. Track ticks at every square root price that is an integer power of price space, P equal to 1.0001, equal to 1.00012 as an example, P, the square root price at tick 0, is 1. P is 1.0001, approximately equal to 1.00005, and P is 1.00001, approximately equal to 0.99995. When liquidity is added to a range, if one or both of the ticks is not already used as a bound in an existing position, that tick is initialized. Not every tick can be initialized. The pool is instantiated with a parameter, tick spacing. Only ticks with indexes that are divisible by tick spacing can be initialized. For example, if tick spacing is 2, then only even ticks can be initialized. Small choices for tick spacing allow tighter and more precise ranges, but may cause swaps to be more gas-intensive. Whenever the price crosses an initialized tick, virtual liquidity is kicked in or out. The gas cost of an initialized tick crossing is constant and is not dependent on the number of positions being kicked in or out at that tick. Ensuring that the right amount of liquidity is kicked in and out of the pool when ticks are crossed, and ensuring that each position earns its proportional share of the fees that were accrued while it was within range, requires some accounting within the pool. The pool contract uses storage variables to track state at a global level, at a per tick level, and at a per position level. 6.2 Global state. The global state of the contract includes 7 storage variables relevant to swaps and liquidity provision. Type UINT UINT INT UINT 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 UINT. Variable name notation liquidity SQRT price X96. Tick IC fee growth global FG, fee growth global FG, protocol fees.token. FP, protocol fees.token. FP Table 1 Global state. 6.2.1 Price and liquidity. In UNISWAP V, each pool contract tracks the pool's current reserves, X and Y. In UNISWAP V, the contract could be thought of as having virtual reserves, values for X and Y, that allow you to describe the contract's behavior as if it followed the constant product formula. Instead of tracking those virtual reserves, however, the pool, these could be computed from the virtual reserves with the contract tracks two different values, liquidity and SQRT price. Following formulas, P equal to RI. Conversely, these values could be used to compute the virtual reserves. Using L and P is convenient because only one of them changes at a time. Price changes when swapping within a tick. Liquidity changes when crossing a tick, or when minting or burning liquidity. This avoids some rounding errors that could be encountered if tracking virtual reserves. You may notice that the formula for liquidity is similar to the formula used to initialize the quantity of liquidity tokens in UNISWAP V before any fees have been earned. In some ways, liquidity can be thought of as virtual liquidity tokens. Alternatively, liquidity can be thought of as the amount that, in P, token reserves changes for a given change. Delta L equal to P. We track P instead of P to take advantage of this relationship, and to avoid having to take any square roots when computing swaps, as described in section 6.2.3. 5. The global state also tracks the current tick index as tick, a signed integer representing the current tick. This is an optimization since at any time you should be able to compute the current tick based on the current SQRT price. Specifically, at any given time the following equation should be true: IC equal to J log 1.0001, PK. 6.2.2 Fees. Each pool is initialized with an immutable value, fee, representing the fee paid by swappers in units of hundredths of a basis point. It also tracks the current protocol fee, phi. This number gives you the fraction of the fees paid by swappers that currently goes to the protocol, rather than to liquidity providers. Phi only has a limited set of permitted values: 0, 1/4, 1/5, 1/6, 1/7, 1/8, 1/9, or 1/10. The global state also tracks two numbers, fee growth global and fee growth global. These represent the total amount of fees that have been earned per unit of virtual liquidity over the entire history of the contract. You can think of them as the total amount of fees that would have been earned by 1 unit of unbounded liquidity that was deposited when the contract was first initialized. They are stored as fixed point unsigned 128 times numbers. Note that in UNISWAP V, fees are collected in the tokens themselves rather than in liquidity, for reasons explained in section 3.2.1. Finally, the global state tracks the total accumulated uncollected protocol fee in each token, protocol fees and protocol fees. This is an unsigned UNT. The accumulated protocol fees can be collected by UNI-governance, by calling the collect protocol function. 6.2.3 Swapping within a single tick. For small enough swaps that do not move the price past a tick, the contracts act like an XY equal to K pool. Suppose gamma is the fee, i.e. 0.003, and yin is the amount of tokens sent in. First, fee growth global and protocol fees are incremented. Fg equal to yin gamma. Fp equal to yin gamma phi. Y is the increase in Y. Y equal to yin. If you use the computed virtual reserves for the token and token balances, then this formula could be used to find the amount of tokens sent out. Y, and square root of price instead of X and Y, we could compute. But remember that in V the contract actually tracks liquidity, X and Y from those values, and then use those to calculate technically the storage variable called protocol fee is the denominator of this fraction, execution price of the trade. But it turns out that there are simple formulas that describe the relationship between P and Y. For A, given L, P equal to, Y equal to PL. There are also simple formulas that describe the relationship between 1P, 1 delta X delta P equal to, 1X equal to PL. First compute the new P using formula 613 or 6.15, and then, when swapping one token for the other, the pool contract can compute the amount of token or token to send out using formula 614 or 616. These formulas will work for any swap that does not push P past the price of the next initialized tick. If the computed deltap would cause P to move past that next initialized tick, the contract must only cross up to that tick, using up only part of the swap, and then cross the tick, as described in section 6301, before continuing with the rest of the swap. 6.2.4 Initialized tick bitmap. If a tick is not used as the endpoint of a range with any liquidity in it, that is, if the tick is uninitialized, then that tick can be skipped during swaps. As an optimization to make finding the next initialized tick more efficient, the pool tracks a tick bitmap of initialized ticks. The position in the bitmap that corresponds to the tick index is set to 1 if the tick is initialized, and 0 if it is not initialized. When a tick is used as an endpoint for a new position, and that tick is not currently used by any other liquidity, the tick is initialized, and the corresponding bit in the bitmap is set to 1. An initialized tick can become uninitialized again if all of the liquidity for which it is an endpoint is removed, in which case the tick's position on the bitmap is zeroed out. 6.3 Tick Index State. The contract needs to store information about each tick in order to track the amount of net liquidity that should be added or removed when the tick is crossed, as well as to track the fees earned above and below that tick. The contract stores a mapping from tick indexes to the following 4 values. Type in UINT. Variable name notation liquidity net delta liquidity gross LG. Fee growth outside FO. Fee growth outside FO. Table 2. Tick index state. Start. S0. Fail. Stop. Pass. S1. S2. No. S5. Yes. S4. Cross next tick. Figure. Swap control flow. Each tick tracks L, the total amount of liquidity that should be kicked in or out when the tick is crossed. The tick only needs to track one signed integer, the amount of liquidity added when the tick is crossed going left to right. This value does not need to be updated when the tick is crossed. We want to be able to uninitialize a tick when there is no longer any liquidity referencing that tick. Since L is a net value, it's necessary to track a gross tally of liquidity referencing the tick liquidity gross. This value ensures that even if net liquidity at a tick is 0, we can still know if a tick is referenced by at least one underlying position or not, which tells us whether to update the tick bitmap. Fee growth outside are used to track how many fees were accumulated within a given range. Since the formulas are the same for the fees collected in token and token, we will omit that subscript for the rest of this section. You can compute the fees earned per unit of liquidity in token 0 above and below a tick I with a formula that depends on whether the price is currently within or outside that range. That is, whether the current tick index IC is greater than or equal to I. We can use these functions to compute the total amount of cumulative fees per share fill IU in the range between 2 ticks, a lower tick IL and an upper tick IU. FO needs to be updated each time the tick is crossed. Specifically, as a tick I is crossed in either direction, its FO should be updated as follows. FO is only needed for ticks that are used as either the lower or upper bound for at least one position. As a result, for efficiency, FO is not initialized until a position is created that has that tick as one of its bounds. When FO is initialized for a tick 1, the value by convention is chosen as if all of the fees earned to date had occurred below that tick. 0 IC less than I. Note that since FO values for different ticks could be initialized at different times, comparisons of the FO values for different ticks are not meaningful, and there is no guarantee that values for FO will be consistent. This does not cause a problem for per-position accounting, since, as described below, all the position needs to know is the growth in G within a given range since that position was last touched. Finally, the contract also stores seconds outside for each tick. This can be thought of as the amount of time spent on the other side of this tick, and can be used to compute the number of seconds that have been spent above or below a tick for a particular range. This value is not used within the contract, but is tracked for the convenience of external contracts that want to know how many seconds a given position has been active. As with FA and FB, the time spent above and below a given tick is computed differently based on whether the current price is within that range, and the time spent within a range can be computed using the values of TA and TB. The number of seconds spent within a range between 2 times tone and T2 can be computed by recording the value of TR at tone and at T2, and subtracting the former from the latter. Like FO, TO does not need to be tracked for ticks that are not on the edge of any position. Therefore, it is not initialized until a position is created that is bounded by that tick. By convention, it is initialized as if every second since the Unix timestamp 0 had been spent below that tick. 0 IC less than I. As with FO values, TO values are not meaningfully comparable across different ticks. TO is only meaningful in computing the number of seconds that liquidity was within some particular range between some defined start time and some end time. 6.3.1 Crossing a tick. As described in section 6.2.3, UNISWAP V acts like it obeys the constant product formula when swapping between initialized ticks. When a swap crosses an initialized tick, however, the contract needs to add or remove liquidity to ensure that no liquidity provider is insolvent. This means the L is fetched from the tick and applied to the global L. The contract also needs to update the tick's own state in order to track the fees earned within ranges bounded by this tick. The fee growth outside and seconds outside values are updated to both reflect current values as well as the proper orientation relative to the current tick. Once a tick is crossed, the swap can continue as described in section 623 until it reaches the next initialized tick. 6.4 Position Index State. The contract has a mapping from user, lower bound, and upper bound to a specific position struct. Each position tracks three values: type variable name notation, UNT liquidity, L UNT fee growth inside FR, UNT fee growth inside FR. Table 3. Position Index State. Liquidity means the amount of virtual liquidity that the position represented the last time this position was touched. Specifically, liquidity could be thought of as XY, where X and Y are the respective amounts of virtual token, and virtual token that this liquidity contributes to the pool at any time that it is within range. Unlike pool shares in UNISWAP VEF, the units for liquidity do not change as fees are accumulated. It is always measured as XY, where X and Y are quantities of token and token respectively. This liquidity number does not reflect the fees that have been accumulated since the contract was last touched, which we will call uncollected fees. Computing these uncollected fees requires additional stored values on the position, fee growth inside and fee growth inside as described below. 6.4.1 Set Position. The set position function allows a liquidity provider to update their position. Two of the arguments to set position, lower tick and upper tick, when combined with the MSG sender, together specify a position. The function takes one additional parameter, liquidity delta, to specify how much virtual liquidity the user wants to add or remove. First, the function computes the uncollected fees that the position is entitled to in each token. The amount collected in fees is credited to the user and netted against the amount that they would send in or out for their virtual liquidity deposit. To compute uncollected fees of a token, you need to know how much FR for the position's range has grown since the last time fees were collected for that position. The growth in fees in a given range per unit of liquidity over between times T0 and tone is simply FR. FR is stored in the position as fee growth inside last, and FR can be computed from the current state of the ticks. Multiplying this by the position's liquidity gives us the total uncollected fees in token 0 for this position. Then, the contract updates the position's liquidity by adding liquidity delta. It also adds liquidity delta to the liquidity net value for the tick at the bottom end of the range, and subtracts it from the liquidity net at the upper tick. If the pool's current price is within the range of this position, the contract also adds liquidity delta to the contract's global liquidity value. Finally, the pool transfers tokens from the user, corresponding to the amount of the liquidity burned or minted. The amount of token or token that needs to be deposited can be thought of as the amount that would be sold from the position if the price were to move from the current price to the upper tick or lower tick. These formulas can be derived from formulas 614 and 616, and depend on whether the current price is below, within, or above the range of the position. Since the formulas for computing uncollected fees in each token are the same, we will omit that subscript for the rest of this section. 8. Delta pp. 0. References: Hayden Adams, Noah Zinsmeister, and Dan Robinson. 2020. Uniswap v. Core. Retrieved February 24, 2021 from Guillermo Angeris and Tarun Chitra. 2020. Improved Price Oracles, Constant, Function Market Makers. In Proceedings of the Second ACM Conference on Advances in Financial Technologies. Association for Computing Machinery, New York, United States, 8091. Michael Egoroff. 2019, StableSwap Efficient Mechanism for Stablecoin Liquidity. Retrieved February 24, 2021 from Delta equal to Deltal, X equal to IL less than or equal to IC less than IU. Alan Niemerg, Dan Robinson and Lev Livnev. 2020. YieldSpace, an automated liquidity provider for fixed yield tokens. Retrieved February 24, 2021 from https yield.s, yield. Abraham Othman. 2012, Automated Market Making, Theory and Practice. PhD dissertation, Carnegie Mellon University. Disclaimer: this paper is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice or a recommendation or solicitation to buy or sell any investment, and should not be used in the evaluation of the merits of making any investment decision. It should not be relied upon for accounting, legal or tax advice or investment recommendations. This paper reflects current opinions of the authors and is not made on behalf of UNISWAP Labs Paradigm or their affiliates, and does not necessarily reflect the opinions of UNISWAP Labs Paradigm, their affiliates, or individuals associated with them. The opinions reflected herein are subject to change without being updated. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share for more videos.